Thank you so much for having me back. I love this congregation, and it's such a nice ride on my way down. I come from the south end of Jacksonville. And I love stories, all kinds of stories. And even before I became a Unitarian Universalist, I have long been a fan of myths and legends. Origin stories, in particular, fascinate me. They are an insight into the collective and creative human mind. Before we had space telescopes, ground-penetrating radar, and calculus, origin stories helped us make sense of why the world worked as it did. Origin stories gave us our place in the grand design. These stories offered soothing explanations for a frightening world that, at the time, was beyond our scientific knowing. My parents always encouraged me to read, probably because it was the only time they could get me to sit still and be quiet for a few minutes. My sister and I were never prevented from pulling anything that interested us off of the family bookshelves, and the only admonishment from the librarian in our small-town library was, "Are you sure you can carry all those books home?" I remember the book of Aesop's Fables on the family bookshelf. The stories of the ant and the grasshopper, Belling the cat, the tortoise and the hare, the fox and the grapes were enchanting, and the book we had these very skillfully done little line drawings that was you could almost tell the story from the picture. And they made me wish that I could draw. I have never been able to draw. The brief and descriptive narrative and the moral of the story, quite literally for Aesop, have always held an appeal to me, couched in little vignettes of cute animals like foxes and bears and lions and mice. Those fables are like origin stories for behavior. Slow and steady wins the race. Don't kill the goose that lays your golden eggs. No kindness is ever too small. These almost serve as directional signs along the paths of human interaction. However, the days of the oracle or Aesop hanging out in Delphi and illuminating our lives with their wisdom is long gone. With the advent of the internet, relentless social media, and a general dumbing down of much public school curricula, even going to the library is not as widespread as it was in my youth. So, we must find other ways to gain education and enlightenment. And I have discovered a source I call traffic school. No, not the kind you have to attend if you've been a naughty driver and don't want your insurance premiums or the points on your licenses to go up. Out there on the highways and the byways, there are useful lessons to be had, all while sitting in your car. My first day in traffic school was the indirect result of a reading I heard in church one day. So I was in the military, and before I was deployed to Iraq, I found meditation to be helpful. I had a decent practice, not daily, but often enough. And after I returned home, I found it impossible to sit quietly and just watch my thoughts rise and fall. There were too many intrusive thoughts. It was too much effort to keep my eyes closed. And I had a physical difficulty in sitting still, although after listening to my mother talk, that may have nothing to do with combat experience. I was looking for a return to the tranquility and mindfulness I had once been able to achieve. Enter the loving kindness meditation. And I don't recall if it was used as an actual meditation or if it was a reading in church, but it was one of those times when the words from the pulpit felt like they had been written for me. I heard them. So in case you're not familiar, the meditation starts with you wishing well to yourself. The exact phrases vary and can be adjusted to what's your situation, but generally it goes, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be safe, may I live with ease. You repeat these phrases slowly, intentionally, for a certain number of times or a certain duration. And as with all practice, when you find your mind wandering, you just return to the phrases. When you're finished focusing that loving kindness on yourself, you change the I, may I be happy, to you, may you be happy, and continue offering loving kindness, this time to somebody close to you, a family member, somebody you know well. You go through the routine again, and then when you're done offering those folks loving kindness, you repeat again to people you don't know well, but you interact with, like the checkout girl at Publix, or maybe the dry cleaner you see every Friday when you pick up your clothes. And the last round spreads your wishes of well-being to all living beings. Now, there were times I could only get through the me part, but it felt like I had accomplished at least a little something in getting back to my practice. One morning, on my way to work, back in the olden days when I had to leave my house to go to work, I found myself sitting in traffic. One lane was closed ahead, and there was plenty enough people, generally being rude, cutting off the merging traffic or angrily blowing their horns. And while I sat, aggravated that I was going to be late, annoyed that those other people didn't know how to drive, and impatiently waiting for the opportunity to creep my car forward another 2 inches, I found myself repeating those words of loving kindness. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be safe. May I live with ease. May my husband, who's also on his way to work, be happy and safe and healthy and live with ease. May the people in the cars around me be happy. May they be safe. May they be healthy. And a weird thing happened. I felt better. Not just calmer, not just like, ooh, good, I got some meditation in, I feel good, my mindset, but better. My physical and my emotional stress dissipated, and simultaneously, that closed lane opened up, the car started moving, and just a little part of my brain wondered if the sending of those good vibes into the universe didn't have an immediate effect that day. I have to keep reminding my husband karma is not instant. On a side note, though, maybe it did. Now, personally, I don't believe in heaven. At least not as a place you get to go if you've been a good little human on this planet. I don't think there's a God or gods that hears prayers and distributes favors based on those requests. But at the same time, I can't say that prayer doesn't work. To me, it's an eternally unverifiable hypothesis. But that one day, offering that prayer, that meditation, sending that loving kindness into traffic, seemed to have an effect. And ever the curious mind, I started reading about the effects of prayer in whatever form you may offer it, whether it's meditation or well wishes or good vibes. Prayer is a nice collective noun for that. And surprisingly enough, it seems there's a little bit of evidence that doing that, sending good vibes or prayers into traffic specifically, might work. Wow. One study tracked traffic patterns over a certain section of road. When a vehicle containing a person who was actively praying for the other motorists was introduced into that traffic pattern, there was a discernible difference in how the traffic flowed. There were fewer tailgating incidents, there was more consideration for people merging or changing lanes, and speeds were slightly slower. Now, I didn't delve into the metrics for this study, and maybe it was all internet hogwash. Maybe it was a poorly designed study to arrive at a predetermined conclusion, but my key takeaway was prayer didn't make it worse. And some days, not making things worse is all we can do, whether in traffic or anywhere else. So back to traffic school. The exercise of loving kindness has become my favorite thing to do in traffic, other than singing loudly with the radio, which none of you want to hear. Somebody's riding my bumper, I move over and wish for them a better day. They must be distracted if they're driving that badly. Speeders weaving in and out of traffic. I imagine their recklessness isn't how they always are. How would I drive if I'd found out my son had been in a terrible accident? How do people react when wives go into labor, or babies fall ill, or houses catch on fire? Wouldn't I too be a speeder on that day? What about the really old man in the left lane going 10 miles an hour under the limit? I'm going to assume he's doing the best he can. Maybe he doesn't have anyone in his life to take him where he needs to go. Maybe he'd actually rather not be driving, but doesn't have another way. And how long until I might be that person? It takes no time to imagine the worst in people, but that also means it takes the same amount of time to offer kindness and compassion to all of those same people. So I have found my hours in traffic have increased my ability to offer loving kindness to the anonymous stranger. There's other research that has found that anytime you have a large group, whether it's people, pedestrians walking down a street, or vehicle traffic, you actually need a few folks breaking the rules. If everyone followed the speed limit to the letter, or number in this case, we would actually become a homogeneous block of traffic. Changing lanes, Getting to your exit and navigating any hazards in the road would become near impossible. Gridlock becomes inevitable. When you throw a couple speeders in there, when you have a couple folks making some illegal lane changes, it serves to mix up and spread out the crowd, allowing everyone the time and space to successfully complete their trip. So even if you can't picture every speed demon on the road as having a bad day or a frazzled person in a hurry to be somewhere, maybe you can consider them useful disruptors and know their presence might truly be making traffic better. And like I mentioned, I work from home most of the time now, so my attendance at traffic school is not as frequent as it used to be. I was recently, though, heading back home from a mid-morning meeting downtown Jacksonville. I was heading south on I-95 and I was still in the city when I saw red flashing lights on the far side of the northbound lanes. I'm heading southbound, traffic's coming this way, and all I saw were the red lights. It looked like a string of like really big Christmas lights on the side of the road. I couldn't see any of the vehicles, and I was instantly like, what's that? I don't know what's going on. As it came around the curve, I saw white fire department cars on the side of the road, the sedans that the fire marshals drive. But there were 6 or 7 of them on the side of the road with all their strobe lights going off, and that was the red lights I had seen. I thought, okay, that's weird. You never see all of the fire chiefs in one place at one time. And as I got closer, I saw a police car in between them, his one little blue light lost among all those red ones going off. And then I saw 2 big fire trucks parked near the end of that group. One more police car blocking the travel lane closest to that side of the shoulder, and an ambulance kind of at the far end of the pack. Then I noticed traffic in front of me tapping their brakes and changing lanes, obviously distracted by what was happening on the other side of the road. And at that moment, there was no loving kindness in me. I was irritated by their distraction. It's not even your side of the road, people. Just keep driving. And as I drove by that massive emergency vehicles, it became apparent that they were on the periphery of the actual scene. I saw a group of firefighters, big brown coats, heavy hats on, standing what seemed to be motionless around what was either an upside down or a crushed car. In that snapshot glimpse of a view I had, one of the heavily jacketed men raised his arm and waved in some sort of signal to someone. And as I continued past the scene, the details sorted themselves in my head, and the story became fully formed. The jaws of life. Nobody was moving because there was nothing to be done until the person could be removed from the vehicle, till the rescuers could get to the injured. The firefighter's wave was to hit the switch on that big truck that would bring power to the jaws of life that would, in a perfect world, save someone. Beyond that little vignette of activity, traffic was backed up for about 2 miles, despite the fact that only one lane of the highway was closed. My group of southbound travelers only registered a slight slowdown as people grabbed the peak and then continued on their way. And I suddenly felt guilty for my moment of irritation at my fellow drivers. First of all, I did exactly what they did. I slowed down to see what was going on. I did it better. I stayed in my lane and didn't tap my brakes up. But what was worse when I thought about it? Someone less than literally a stone's throw away from me was having what might possibly be the worst day of their life. Trapped in a car, possibly injured. For the emergency personnel around the car, it was just another day at work. They were doing their job. They couldn't be bothered by the fact that there were all these people that weren't getting what they wanted, which was an unblemished trip into Jacksonville. And as for me, I wasn't even hindered in my trip. I had no standing to be annoyed in this situation. I thought about the juxtaposition of emotions in that one little scene. The unseen, trapped, probably hurt, terrified person. The firefighters setting emotion aside and just getting the work done, doing their jobs. The annoyed and aggravated drivers who were stuck in the traffic behind that accident. All of them just a few feet away from each other. And all in separate worlds. And I thought about this the rest of the way home, which wasn't far, about 7 minutes. And as I pulled into my driveway, I realized the sight that I was still thinking about, that little snapshot scene, was already completely different. The person was probably out of the car, the ambulance screaming to the hospital, hopefully. The police would have reopened the blocked lane of travel. The northbound traffic was getting back to normal. Somebody was writing a traffic report. The white-shirted fire department managers in their white sedans had left the side of the road and returned to their stations at that point. The accident itself, and that tiny little bit of it that I saw, was ephemeral in the grand scheme of things. But at the same time, it left an indelible mark. More than 20 years ago, I had a rollover accident. At 4 o'clock in the morning, I was rear-ended on I-95 going into Jacksonville towards the airport by an inattentive speeding motorist. And it was my first big business trip with my new company out of town, and I missed the plane, which is a whole other story there. But several weeks later, I returned to work. I wasn't fully healed, but I was functional. And during the inevitable break room conversation about your wreck, one of my coworkers mentioned that the morning of the accident, they heard the early morning traffic report and saw that there was an accident on I-95. The TV screen showed the location as a little orange triangle, which meant that the vehicle was off the shoulder and it was not an impediment to the flow of traffic. He shared how later that same day of the accident, he realized somebody he knew was that little orange triangle on the screen. He said it made him take pause the next time that he saw that morning traffic report. Those colorful icons on the screen weren't just markers for accidents, they were real people having a bad day. So it's kind of like traffic is a miniature version of itself. We judge each other by appearances. We assume we know who someone is by what they're driving. Workers drive shabby pickup trucks, bankers in luxury sedans, drug dealers in fast imports. But have you ever been in a vehicle completely like your own, like the one you drive every day? And do you sometimes get a different reaction from people in traffic or in the drive-thru? Does driving a rental car make you feel or think differently about yourself? We are often trapped in our own bubbles, moving through the days or the miles, isolated from each other, while they are isolated from us too. And although we're all moving in the same direction, we're not together. And yet our actions have a direct impact on those around us, whether we realize it or not. In traffic, those impacts are usually immediate and sometimes are actually impacts, crashes that result in crushed or upside down cars. We lose our tempers and imagine the worst in people we don't even know, and it's reflexive. It's hard to stop and think about what our experience looks like from someone else's point of view. We treat other drivers on the road like we treat strangers on the internet, with doubt, sometimes disgust, sometimes fear and anger. We other people like they are extensions of their machines and not wholly people at all. In a way, it's logical that the behaviors we engage in during our day-to-day life would repeat themselves in a subset of activities like driving. I don't think I've uncovered some great philosophical truth here. Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance has already been written. Nice. The beauty of traffic school is that it removes us from the messy, distracting parts of the world without removing us from the world. In the narrow confines between the yellow and the white lines, you can sit back and observe human nature and your interactions with it in real time. You can practice sending good vibes into the universe at highway speeds. You can hone your ability to offer empathy, compassion, and kindness to strangers. You can practice coming up with alternative explanations for people's behavior that aren't reflexive emotions. Even if there's no measurable effect outside of your own vehicle, I believe in the words of Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu. Do your little bit of good where you are. It's those little bits of good put together that overwhelm the world. And if you get a little bit better in the car, maybe you'll be a little bit better when you're not in the car. And if all that happens is that if you get a little bit better at being a good human, then you will have successfully graduated from traffic school.
Nice.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.